So my boy Big Fudge, Sam Towns, put out a really awesome video about the different types of grinder belts. However, far be it from me to add anything to something that Sam Towns has, because he's usually the one that does it to me. I've got a couple of addendums to his video that he wouldn't have covered in his, because it's an adjacent topic. But if you're going to actually be taking his advice and picking up some of these awesome belts that he's going into, they can add up when you're buying a lot of them, for good reason. They're good quality belts, and because of that you want to get as much life out of them as possible. So I have a few tips from the perspective of somebody that's fairly new to working a 2x72 to help you extend the life of those belts for as long as possible and get the most bang for your buck out of them. And one of the first things to talk about is actually the angles that you are using when you've got a nice ceramic belt like this Cubitron. This is actually a tip I picked up from Niels Vandenberg in his videos, and I'll link that video up here. He explains it a lot better than I ever could. However, getting hard 90-degree angles, as in the corners of the edges on this, see how it's very sharp still? Putting that directly into the belt as it's spinning will actually strip off the ceramic coating of your belt, and you can actually see it, the color of the dust will build up very, very quickly, and that dust is actually the coating of your belt stripping off. It shouldn't happen. So if you're seeing that happen, it's time to actually break the edges in first. So if you're going to be pushing in on a ceramic belt, it doesn't work on Alox belts and things like that. It doesn't really affect it, but on ceramic belts, pushing in sideways to eat in material that way when you're profiling is a surefire way to, without breaking the corners, is a surefire way to strip that coating. So what I mean by breaking the corners is going in at a bit of an angle first and actually having a bit of a chamfer going on there, and it won't damage your belts quite that much. Really great little tip to save and extend the life of your belts, especially if you do have lovely Cubitrons like these ones here from Weber Abrasives. Another thing to consider with prolonging the life of the belts when it comes to stripping the coating off with those harsh angles, if you're using a grinding jig like this, sometimes even though you do have it as a slight angle because you're getting a bevel in there, that can still be quite a hard edge, and if you're going to be pulling away that material anyway, you can kind of chamfer it off a little bit to give a more gentle approach of the ceramic belt as it slides past. Just something to keep in mind. Another thing you'll encounter, which you can actually curb damaging your belts with, is plasma cutter slag or dross that builds up on the edges of the cuts. When you're cutting out blanks on using a plasma cutter, it does weird things to the composition of the steel because it superheats it so much, and it sort of melts it a little bit, and you can kind of get these dirty edges around there. You see there? That stuff is super hard. It's like glass, and it will rip the coating off of your belts. And a lot of people, once they do a cut, they'll clean it up by flat facing it against your platen to try and cut that off. You can save a lot of life on your belts by actually using an angle grinder with a grinding disc first to rip that dross off and sort of clean up the outer edges, the sides of the blank before taking it to the grinder to actually do profiling, just because the hardness that dross has is insane, and it will rip the ceramic coating off of your belts pretty quickly. So keep in mind the backings of your belts as well. Some of them are cloth backed, some of them are like polyester backed, I think it's polyester. Some of them are just paper backed and things like that. So the firmness of the belt will actually determine, based on the material that the backing is made from, will determine how tight of an angle it can go around your wheels. See, I've got no very hard angles. The smallest angle I've got on this is, well, there's a 90-degree angle there. There is a smaller angle at the drive wheel back here. However, it's spread over such a large area that it doesn't, it's not really pinching the belt. But let's just say you had a small wheel cartridge. It's actually bending the belt like this if you've actually pulled it really far out at the front, and that's putting undue strain on the lighting, undue strain on the belt because it's bending at too sharp of an angle. So keep that in mind, because some of them belts have very firm backing material, which means that it will be actually putting undue strain and wear on the belt to actually bend it around too tight of a curve. So just another thing that can help extend the life of your belts. Now, this situation here is definitely a do as I say, not as I do, because I have belts here, I have belts hanging here, I've got other belts hanging over here. I've got so many different types of belts that I ran out of space to put them. Now, it's not actually a good idea, even though you see everybody do it, it's not a good idea to have your 2x72 belts hanging up on the walls of your workshop, because all of the dust that fills the air, all of the schmutz that comes off, grinder grit, you've got metal shavings, sawdust if you do woodworking in your workshop like I do, all of that fills the air, and it eventually comes and settles down, and it settles all over the lovely grit of your belts. And then you pick that belt off the wall, stick it on your grinder, and you're just forcing all of that crap that was in the air through the workpiece that you're doing. It's just not good for them. The best way to actually do it is to get some sort of flat plastic tubs that you can tuck away somewhere under a shelf and put your belts in there, and sort of bundle them up nicely, kind of like this, wrap them up, stick them in a plastic tub, and it keeps all of that airborne schmutz off of them, because you don't want schmutz on your belts, because everything that's on your belts gets put straight into your work at high speed with a 2x72, and you don't necessarily want that. Another good example of do as I say, not as I do, is you don't want to hang them on screws in the wall like I've done here. It creates a pinch point that when they're sitting there, it's really not good for them. It's the temporary measure for me at the moment, because I got inundated with a huge number of belts from Rob at Weber Abrasives, and I didn't know where to put them. So they're sort of in temporary homes at the moment, and now that the new year is here, I've got a little bit of time. I'm going to actually come up with a better storage solution for them, something that actually follows my previous rule and has them locked away, safe from all of the airborne particles in this shop. Although with the westerlies coming through that door and then keeping that door open, this shop turns into a wind tunnel during the day, because in Tasmania it is always windy. It's never not windy, it's just constant. It's either slightly windy or very windy. So that minimizes the amount of airborne schmutz in my shop, but still, it's just good practice. The final tip for extending the life of your belts is to minimize grinding on hardened steel. I noticed some projects like that you've got to get quite thin, like straight razors, chef knives, things like that. It makes it's a lot less riskier. It makes a lot more sense to actually harden them while they're at their thickest and then grind them thin. And that's very valid, and I would recommend that as well, just because it minimizes chance of warping or cracking on those thinner projects. However, wherever possible, anneal the hell out of your blade before grinding it, and it will be a softer base for your belts to actually cut through, and thus make them last a lot longer. It's just common sense, but it's something that a lot of people don't really think about. If you don't have to grind while hardened, don't grind while hardened. And that's about it, really. So hopefully that has given you a little bit of extra tipping to get you having those belts last as long as possible. I mean, Cubitron belts last for ages anyway. I'm a real big fan of them since starting to use them. And to be honest, I want them to last as long as possible. I don't have to keep buying belts. And if you look after them well enough, they can actually last a pretty decent amount of time. Especially if you're like me and you don't make knives just constantly all day, every day. So definitely a few extra tips can go a long way in terms of the life of your belts. Anyway, that's me. I'm going to get back to work. I've got plenty to do now that 2020 is here. Lots of orders to catch up on. Don't forget to check out my Patreon that I've just recently started. Lots of good stuff there. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and check out my Etsy store as well. And I will see you guys on the next video. Catch you later.
Everything is lifting off the ground. The train are going off the rails. The rivers are turning around. Even the rain is upside down. I'm having trouble to hold on. Anything close, anything strong. Someone tries to grab my hand. I'm reaching out, but I pretend. You're making a mess again.